Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined in Chicago with Jeff Berkowitz of Public Affairs TV. And Jeff, a number of things have been going on as we approach the break for Thanksgiving, and we hope all of our viewers have a great Thanksgiving with their families. But we just came out of a government shutdown. We've had the riots up in Chicago against ICE officers, or let's call them protests, but they have been violent in certain situations. So I'm curious, before we get into the totality of everything, regarding these protests in Chicago against ICE officers picking up people they would say are here illegally. What has been the take, as you ascertain it, of the Chicago citizens on the street?
Well, I think it's certainly mixed. And Chicago is a Democratic city, so it's a Democratic Party. 80% of the citizens, whichever one you use, are Democrats, 20% Republicans. It's a little bit better for Republicans as you branch out from Chicago to Cook County. But this is a Democratic city, and they are a sanctuary city and a sanctuary state. And they're not thrilled with what ICE was doing. Director Bovino, who's making this tour of going sort of coming from city to city on this effort to infuse border control people, ICE people, as they purport to go after the worst of the worst, but seem to be going after a number of illegal immigrants who are basically, they're here illegally, but there's no showing that large numbers that they're arresting have committed crimes in addition to being here illegally. So certainly Chicago has not jumped on that. There's been a constant focus on one suburb, Broadview, just outside of Chicago, because that's where the ICE facility that exists and that ICE operates into and out of. So that's the center of protests. And that stuff has gone back and forth to the federal courts and several judges involved. And I won't go into all that, but I would expect that will fade into the future because ICE is now leaving. Director Bovino has come here and been the center of attention in the courts. He's now going to, they call it Charlotte's Web, I guess, Charlotte, North Carolina, and other areas east of here. So I suspect all of this stuff that's been in the news and daily and attracting a lot of attention will be less as people turn to the governor's race, which we'll get into.
We're also getting into the holidays, so we'll see how that goes. Plus, people don't want to be going up protesting, I think, when the temperature drops down to near freezing or below. But I'm interested, and I would ask the public to make a comment on the video, that is, if you're watching it on YouTube, about what do you think. And yesterday, we, the Illinois Channel, recorded a Senate subcommittee hearing, Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing, on this issue of these writers, and they had a Chicago area woman, Miss Danielle Carter Walters, who's the vice president of an organization called Flip Chicago Red. So it's interesting. Obviously, Chicago's been hardcore Democrat for 100 years, but on the other hand, we've also had black voters be hardcore Democratic voters for, I would say, 65 years, going back to about the time they started to change from Republican to Democrat, about 1960. But now you're getting a political division on some of these issues, and that's what I would want the viewers to react to. Let's take a listen to the first bite from Miss Danielle Carter Walters as she spoke on this issue yesterday before the Senate committee.
Sanctuary should mean safety for Americans. In Chicago, it now means giving up our rights and our security. To every leader still defending these harmful policies, your time of pretending to serve the people is over. We will speak up, we will stand up, and we will not let corruption decide the future of our city. We will take our city and state back because it's for we, the people.
We're going to play another bite in just a moment. But Jeff, first, what's your reaction to what you just heard?
Well, look, that's fairly articulate, certainly forceful, and there's a flip Chicago red has been around for a while. Chicago is not going to get flipped red anytime this decade. There is a movement. It seems to be relatively small. There is more than that movement. There's more dissatisfaction among, or was at least, say 3, 4, 5 months ago, with the amount of resources being devoted to illegal immigrants in Chicago and in the suburbs relative to low-income Hispanics and blacks feeling that they've been crowded out of programs that were intended to help them and are now going to illegals. Unfortunately, I think she would be better to focus on that issue, as I've just said, as opposed to these broad statements about sanctuary cities should be about safety for citizens, as opposed to what I just said. They're concerned about the resources. When I say they, I mean minority blacks in Chicago, minority Hispanics. They are ripe for pickings from the Republican Party, but I think you have to tone it down a little bit, not be quite as forceful as the speaker was.
Well, you know Chicago more than I do. I would tend to say that you got to be outspoken. You got to hit people in the forehead with a 2x4 to get their attention. If you tone it down, it just doesn't have the impact. And I think what I'm reading is that you have these black Americans who have been living in the poor areas of Chicago, the high crime areas. The crime in Chicago, the murders are well known across the nation. And here we have these white protesters, these liberal white protesters. Where were they about all the blacks being killed in Chicago? Instead, you know, they're standing up and going out and fighting ICE officers because they're picking up these people that came into the country illegally. And we have seen under the Pritzker administration, which the Republicans in the legislature have spoken out, this massive amount of money being spent by the city of Chicago, by the state of Illinois, on giving health care to these people, by giving them housing. And I think what I'm seeing in these comments, not just of this one woman, Miss Danielle Carter Walters, but she speaks, I think, for a number of people versus the growth of this organization, and saying, what the hell? We're American citizens, and you're giving all of this aid to these illegal aliens. And by the way, President Trump is the guy standing up for what we want for our safety, trying to bring in the National Guard as he did in D.C., as he did now in Memphis and others. So as I just explained this, am I wrong or am I on to something that, you know, black citizens in Chicago and maybe elsewhere are kind of saying, why am I tied to the Democrat Party if they're going to be standing up and fighting for illegal aliens and they've never been standing up fighting for us?
Look, I don't think sanctuary states, sanctuary cities are the way to go. I don't think it's been good for Chicago and Illinois. I think if you look at Indiana and Florida, who treat this issue quite differently, and their criminal statutes are set up quite differently in terms of whether they require a warrant or not to make any of these arrests and so forth, that's all backwards in Illinois. But all of that is a slice of the main issue that I think blacks and Hispanics are concerned about in Chicago and outside of Chicago and the rest of Illinois. They're concerned about crime, and even though Democrats argue crime has gone down, and when people argue, look at what's happened under this movement by Trump to send the National Guard here, and crime has gone down. Well, crime was going down before. They claim it went down because of this. Maybe it did. But my point is, the concern of minorities, Hispanics, blacks, and others in Chicago and Illinois is much broader than this sanctuary state issue. And that's fine, that's one slice of it. But their broader concern are the schools, their kids not learning how to read at worse rates than whites, 10 to 20% in Chicago, a state average of at best 40% learning how to read, 60% not, maybe only a third learning how to read. Their concern is about taxes. There's
Well,
a
I
big
mean,
concern. Let me say one second. Let me bring it home, and then we'll stop. But there's a big concern right now in Chicago about property taxes, especially in the lower income south side of Chicago. They're astoundingly high, and that's now caught attention of the people who are paying those astoundingly high taxes. And
I've
Republicans
actually done some interviews
statewide,
on that
yeah,
in the
and
past.
Republicans
And just
state,
for the viewers, I
right.
want to insert some of these places, the property values are low, right? Uh,
Right.
these black communities, the property values are low, but I'm sorry, the home values are low, but the property taxes are something like 30 or 40 or 50% of the value of a home. It's absolutely
Which
ridiculous.
is one reason why the property values of the homes are so low, because the taxes are so high. So if you're going to buy that house, do you want to pay those enormously high property taxes? Obviously, that's reflected in the sales price.
The prop,
So what I'm
Go
saying
ahead.
is these issues, the issues that you and I are talking about right now, are the bread and butter issues that are concerning more blacks than the sanctuary issue. I'm not saying they're not concerned about it. I'm not saying it doesn't lead
Yeah,
to problems,
well, we're not
but
saying, nobody's saying, I think it's only that one issue. It's just that this did come up, and she's a Chicagoan, and I wanted to bring this to your attention. Let's play one more bite here
okay.
before we leave this topic, and just hear what else she had to say, and some of the reforms that she says we need to have in this state and in Chicago itself.
Sanctuary policies have brought chaos and corruption to our city. So we, the people of Chicago, we demand this: a federal review of how Illinois blocks ICE from doing their job, a criminal investigation into judges who target ICE officers unfairly, a full check of all the money spent by state and the city on migrant programs, police, Cook County, and federal agencies working together again with ICE, and to the sanctuary city policies that put our safety at risk.
So there you go, Jeff. By the way, I will say one of us ought to grab this woman and interview her. She sounds pretty interesting and articulate. She's given a lot of thought to this. But again, your response to what you just heard?
Well, she's calling for a federal investigation. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But there is
Well, I mean, could it?
there is a
The
reaction.
Trump administration, Trump is certainly no friend of Governor Pritzker, and
Well,
vice versa.
right. And some of that will go when, as you've said, there's a hearing. This is from a hearing that's brought on by the Republican Party, but it's not getting much cooperation from the
Should
Democrats.
we
So it's
have
not
an
bipartisan.
investigation into the billions of dollars, at least $1 billion that's been spent on healthcare, on housing, on food, on these illegal immigrants? And, for years, black Americans have been talking about reparations. That's an entirely different issue I don't want to get deep into. But I can see from their standpoint, they're saying, wait a minute, we've been talking for some help for years, for decades, and then these people just walk in unannounced, uninvited, and the government just rolls out the red carpet and says, where can we house you? Where can we feed you? And by the way, we'll give you free tuition to go to college in certain circumstances.
Well, that number one, there is a reaction, and it's occurring in the courts. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals that Seventh Circuit handles federal appeals from Wisconsin, from Illinois, and from Michigan. And they've just recently handled an appeal from one of the orders of a Northern District of Illinois federal judge who had told Director Bovino, look, I want you coming in daily and giving reports. She said she saw what was happening. She thought there was very inappropriate, and in her words, I think she said unlawful behavior in terms of the use of force was too extreme. She required identification of these ICE officials on the uniform so they knew their names. She required warnings before any use of tear gas. And the Seventh Circuit said, no, this is an overreach on the judge's part, the federal judge's part. These are executive decisions that she is now trying to make as a part of the judiciary. And so they knocked it down. And now they said she can come back at some point And if these things continue to be inappropriate and she wants to argue, or they want to argue as a state, they were looking for a preliminary injunction, for a permanent injunction, then they can still argue these things. But the case had not been made for this kind of overreaching by this judge requiring daily reports from the director of ICE. And so what I'm saying is that reaction is occurring, that's playing out in the courts, but that takes a while. And so these folks are leaving and this issue is sliding away. And now we'll see, as you say, the holidays are over, or holidays are upon us. The holidays will soon be over. And when Christmas is over, we'll have barely 2 months for the Republican primary for governor. And that will be a
That's
hotly
on March
contested primary.
17th, for those who wanted
Right.
to be reminded.
So the issues will be broader. There'll be crime, there'll be
Well,
jobs, there'll be
I
pensions.
think this is more
so
of a
forth.
national issue. It could have, as I say, resonate in Chicago. And that's what I want to know. I'm wondering, what are the political ramifications of these things? Now, I'll remind the people the obvious. Governor Pritzker has always had an African-American as his running mate, Juliana Stratton, who's now running for the Senate. And he has picked Mr. Mitchell to be his new running mate, a former state representative, as our current lieutenant governor is running, as I just said, for the U.S. Senate. So it's not, Governor Pritzker could argue that he has been very attuned to Black America and their concerns. We'll have to see how this shakes out. I don't really know to what extent, but it's worth talking about when you see the testimony, as we saw yesterday in the Senate committee.
Well, yeah, and the shakeout that has to occur on March 17th is, what is the message for the Republican Party as they leave the primary and go to the general election, and who is the best messenger? Because as you know, Darren Bailey is now, and we say, as we've said before, certainly Darren Bailey has had this tragic loss with his wife Cindy of the death of one of their sons, and
Their son and his whole family.
His whole family,
Who
their
died in a
daughter-in-law,
helicopter crash out in Colorado about 2 weeks ago.
their daughter-in-law, 2 of their grandkids. A terrible, tragic thing. Terry
There
and I
was
think,
one surviving
both
son
expressed
who
this
was not
before.
on the helicopter, I should say.
Right, and so,
One of the grandchildren of
but the
their.
point is, having expressed our sympathy, expressed our sincere condolences, now Bailey has said he's decided to continue on with this. He paused, and he's continue on with his seeking the Republican nomination for governor, which will be decided March 17. And so now people will be commenting, and I don't think we're going to be saying what I just said every time. We'll have criticisms of Bailey, of other candidates for governor, and this is the way that it goes in a contested election.
Speaking,
And so we're now,
speaking of that, I wanted to bring up, because we have an editorial that the Tribune came out speaking on the Republicans, written after the recent elections and the loss by the Republicans in the city of New York, the governorship of New Jersey, and the loss in Virginia. Now, those are all blue areas, but the Tribune came out with this small section of an editorial they wrote that said nothing that happened on Tuesday really changes the fundamentals for Illinois Republicans. They remain badly outgunned and boxed in by gerrymandered maps and a governor with unlimited resources. What they can control is discipline, sticking to the bread and butter issues voters actually care about, rejecting, so says the Tribune, the magna theatrics that repel moderates, and proving they can be responsible stewards of taxpayers' money. Jeff, as you and I talked about off camera, I'm not sure what theatrics they're really talking about, the Tribune is talking about, and I think you and I would somewhat disagree here, because I think sometimes if you're trying to break out, and I go back to the election of 1994, for years, 40 years, on the congressional level, the House Republicans were in the minority, 40 years, until Newt Gingrich took over the party and was aggressive in fighting the Democrats and making his issues known. And I would say the approach by Gerald Ford, who was the House Minority Leader, and Bob Michels of Peoria, and some others during that 40-year period. That's why they were in the minority. So I would disagree with the Tribune. I think what Donald Trump has done is reform the Republican Party from being a party of corporate types and country club types to making it much more of a blue collar party attuned to the middle class of Americans. With that, and we'll hear shortly from Ted Dabrowski, who's a Republican candidate. Let me just quickly flash Ted up here so you know what Ted looks like. Ted Dabrowski is also running, and what do you say, Jeff, about the Tribune and their pitch of what the Republicans in Illinois should be doing?
Well, they talk about gerrymandering. In the governor's race, gerrymandering is not the main issue. It affects state house seats, state senate seats, but thankfully, the Democrats or Republicans, nobody's figured out how to gerrymander.
Let me
the
just
state of Illinois.
insert that gerrymandering does impact getting elected in the Illinois House, the Illinois Senate, and in our congressional districts, right? So
Right, but it doesn't, it shouldn't. I don't see that it impacts, certainly not directly, the election of governor. And the main
you
focus
say of
people
governor?
have to understand. Yeah, when the
no,
the
not
Illinois
of governors.
citizens,
No, of governors it doesn't.
right. No, but that's what the Tribune ignores. And they go to Tony McComey, and she talks about we can't do anything because we have such a bad map.
But she's
No,
talking
she
about the
shouldn't
House
say that.
Republicans.
I know, but that's a very limited view because we have to ask who is the leader in Illinois of the Republican Party? Is there a leader? It clearly is not Tony McComey. She is the House Minority Leader. It clearly is not John Curran. He is the Senate Minority Leader. So who is the leader? Some people say it's the next person who will be the nominee of the Republican Party. Will it be Darren Bailey because he ran before and was beat by 500,000, 500,000 votes? Will he be able to change that? Will their outcome be different? Will it be Ted Dabrowski, who's been involved in thinking
Unless
about
you
these
get
issues and
somebody who
solutions for
so
the last 15
dominates the
years?
conversation as Donald Trump did. Donald Trump is unquestionably the leader of the National Republican Party. Relative to Illinois, you could get a Darren Bailey. I don't think Darren Bailey, if he were to be the nominee, is going to have the same level of control over the Illinois Republican Party that Trump has at the national level. I think John Curran, is the leader, obviously, in the Senate, and Tony McComey, Representative Tony McComey, in her caucus. But anyway, with that,
Well, if just
we'll
say,
have
let
to
me
see.
just say in response,
Go ahead.
if the Tribune wanted to do something useful, they might take a look at how the votes came out last time. They might see that Darren Bailey, when he ran last time in 2022, he got out of Cook County 350,000 votes approximately. That's a population of 5 million people. I realize they're not all registered, they're not all turning out, but that's what he got, 350,000, if I got that right. And in collar counties that ring around the county of Cook, he got 409,000. And in what I'll call the close-in counties that are not really far downstate, he got 100,000 votes. And then he got his big number downstate was about 900,000 because there are 102 counties in the state of Illinois, but the great mass of the people are in Cook and in the collar counties and in the close-in counties, maybe 20 or so. Now, downstate has so many counties and a few that have some large numbers, that turns out a lot of vote, and it's highly for the Republicans, and in this case for Darren Bailey. So the question is for the Tribune, instead of writing all these words that don't really mean much, they could have said, well, how does any Republican win? If they won, one way to do it would start with what Bailey got, flip 90,000 seats in Cook, flip 90,000 more in the collar counties, flip maybe 30,000 what I'll call the close-in counties, and then maybe 40,000 downstate, which really squeeze out from your base. And if you flip 250,000 votes, if you get people who voted at that point for Democrats to vote Republican, as I've just outlined, that means you flip 250, you're making up your 500,000
If you're talking about governor,
margin for deficit.
and you're talking about statewide. I would also,
Right.
going back to what we just heard from the young black woman there, Ms. Carter Walters, if you got in Cook County, in the surrounding areas, in those areas where you have a large percentage of black voters, if you could, as the Illinois Republican Party, get more blacks voting for you, because the blacks heretofore have been like 90% Democratic. If you could increase that, you would start to pick up some of these districts and be more competitive in what have been solidly Democrat areas. So we're talking not
So,
just,
I
I
mean-
don't want to talk merely at the governor level, which you were, and to your credit, but you got to, I think, also rebuilding the Illinois Republican Party would be getting more people running in the House and the Senate. And it said, by the
Yeah.
way, in that article, and Tony McCombie made the point that when you're so beaten down, when the Democrats have the supermajorities, and when the governor has so much money he can dole out to these candidates, something the Republicans don't have. They used to have it with Bruce Rauner's pockets. They don't have it now. That it's hard to get new good candidates to run for the House and the Senate in the legislature of Illinois, because it just seems like such an upward battle.
So and what Ted Dabrowski's saying here is you have to have Republicans who have principles,
Well,
who run on those
we
principles
haven't
and
looked
run
at
on the
Ted's
issues.
response. I wanted to bring that up.
Oh,
Let's,
okay, sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, we looked at it, but Ted Dabrowski wrote a response, and he said, this is Ted Dabrowski writing this, who's running for governor. The integrity part's particularly important. The point of the Republican Party is to stick to our governing principles, propose reform policies grounded in those principles, and pursue those policies when we are finally entrusted with political power. Now is not the time to be coy. That was my point. We must draw the contrast between an Illinois political ruling class that divvies up the spoils of state government among cronies versus an Illinois Republican Party that seeks to govern by earning the trust of families who simply desire personal safety and affordability in the state they choose to call home. All right, now that
Yes,
said,
and
go.
And notice affordability means, in large part, what does a governor have an impact on, especially if he can persuade the Illinois House and Illinois Senate to go along with him? Taxes. There's a movement now to raise taxes, have a 3% surcharge on, from Pat Quinn. This is his idea. Get this on the ballot, a 3% surcharge on millionaires in Illinois. And yeah, Pat, maybe then you can drive away more millionaires, like they drove away Ken Griffin, a billionaire, a 30 billionaire, now 50 billionaire. That's going to help you a lot.
And
isn't
others
it,
have
Pat?
been leaving. By the way, we only got about a minute
course.
and a half here, so.
So that my point is that's what you need by principles. You need to focus on issues, and you need to say, of the four candidates, of Bailey, of Dabrowski, of Heidner, is there a fourth candidate? Because Mendrick said 60,000 before, 60,000 now. As you say, it takes money. Mom, M is for message, O is for organization, M is for money. If you don't have that, you're not a credible candidate. So decide who the credible candidates are, decide who the best messenger is, and they become, or that person becomes, the leader of the
Affordability seems to be
Republican
the
Party in Illinois.
buzzword of the day. Mandami in New York brought this up. In here, I would say to any candidate looking to run, you got to hit property taxes. Property taxes are the bane of Republicans, Democrats, and independents. So that's something what I would say people need to focus on. And that's something the governor here has not really done much of anything on. Instead, what they continue to look at is raise taxes, but we're really almost out of time. I'll give you the last word.
Well, you just got to say, yeah, so the last word is this. You can't cut taxes unless you cut spending. So that's the real target, cut spending. And the money is going into schools, and we're not getting performance. We need less money and
cut you
better
off.
performance out of
Have a
schools.
great Thanksgiving, folks. We'll see you next time.